Very good morning. Very good morning to everyone who is going to join us or is going to watch us in replay. Paul, I'm just waiting a little bit to see if you're actually going to appear live on
Okay.
LinkedIn because I'm looking at my mobile. It's like, is this actually working? But we will.
Technology.
Yeah, technology and universe, it's always a good combination. We just have to trust that this is
Yeah,
happening
quite. Yeah.
here. But let's go and let's start. We said 10:15 in the UK. It's 10:15 in the UK. So let's go ahead
Sure.
and allow me to welcome to my social media house an amazing human being, Paul Kinkaid. Hello,
Thank you.
Paul. Very warm welcome. And thank you so very much for gifting me your time this morning. I'm so excited about this conversation.
Good morning. No, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm humbled to be asked, and let's see where it goes. Let's do it.
Let's see. Well, before we started recording or before we went live, we said we are going to go with the flow. We know more or less what we want to talk about. Obviously,
Yeah.
leadership is going to be our topic, and your expertise and your experiences and all the great stuff that you are doing right now around leadership. But before we go there, I first want to congratulate you on your recent engagement.
Thank you.
You
Yeah,
and
I'm
Emily.
delighted.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure she knows what she's let herself in for, but she said yes, and now it's too late. There's no going back.
Yeah. And you're going on holidays on Saturday, so it's all
Yeah.
happening right now.
Yeah, it's crazy. We're in that trying to get everything done before you go away. I'm sure everyone listening has been there before. There's just not enough hours in the day to get it all done.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just get on with it. This was like your little hint of, okay, then the woman just get on with it then. You've got a lot
Not
to
at all,
do.
not at all.
No, so once again, Paul, thank you so very much for being here with me. And I really want to go straight away into the topic of talking about leadership because it's your love child, it's my love child. We do have a little bit very common views on many things. Maybe we just look at things from different angles.
Yeah.
We had an opportunity to spend a great couple of hours, two and a half hours together a few weeks ago. And we just said, we definitely at some point want to do something together.
Yeah.
And here we are doing something together
We
already,
are.
even sooner than we thought we would. And so I'm going to ask you first on a big picture, kind of a macro picture of leadership. If we look at the leadership, I know it's such a broad word, but from a bird perspective, how do you see leadership shifting over the last few years, just in general kind of terms?
Yeah, well, a good but big question. I think on the whole, strategically, big picture, there's quite a large leadership gap at the moment. You've only got to look across to the United States to see what's going on there politically, look at the UK, what's going on politically and commercially, and into Europe. And there seems to be these big sways left and right politically. So I'm not entirely sure that people know what they want at the moment. There's quite a lot of selfishness going on. There's a lot of polarization going on. But I just sense that leaders, big scale strategic leaders, aren't maintaining pace with the pace of change of society. So they're a few steps behind, which demonstrates the fickle nature of human beings, right? We're trying to ask for what we want from leaders, but the leaders are too slow to create and affect that change. So I think that from my perspective, we just need to get a bit more agile, a bit more, it's a word I don't really like, I can't believe I've said it already in the first 4 minutes, but a bit more responsive to what people want, but not so much as we're changing, like this all the time. So on balance, I think there's a bit of a leadership gap, and that can be overcome, I think, relatively straightforward, which we might want to explore later. But leadership gap is how I would explain it with slow, cumbersome leaders.
Okay, absolutely. I'm there with you. And when we bring it a little bit down the funnel, looking at leaders in the corporations, SMEs, just a little bit that kind of a middle tier. What's your feel in there?
I think people are doing the best they can, but the context within which they're operating is rapidly changing. It's unpredictable. It's VUCA, isn't it? That volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. We've not really recovered since post-COVID. in that line. So I think people are struggling slightly with the cost of living, the challenges of leading a workforce who are struggling themselves. And there's an expectation on the leaders to provide, which obviously in the current economic climate, certainly in the UK and elsewhere, they're going to struggle to do that and meet that expectation of provision.
Yeah, it's a huge task, isn't it?
It is. And for me, that would be just fall back on an appropriate level of care, but not charity.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go and talk about your baby. When we talk about leadership, forensic leadership.
Yeah. I came across forensic leadership many, many years ago. A great guy called Neil Powell introduced me to one of the central concepts of forensic science, which is called the Locard exchange principle. Edmond Locard was a French medical doctor, and he acknowledged the fact that, and we all know this in forensic science, that every time you touch something, you leave an element of you behind, and it leaves an element of it on you. And he called these traces. So the Locard exchange principle simply says that in forensic science, every contact leaves a trace. Well, if you lift that entire theory, much bigger than simply that one phrase, but it's a beautiful phrase, lift it up and drop it into the leadership or the broader relationship domain, every contact leaves a trace. So every interaction we have, we take a bit of that interaction with us, both sides of the party, each of the stakeholders, I should perhaps say. And these can be measured and these can be remembered. And I, somewhat simplistically, but not in a binary sense, the positive traces I refer to as green traces and the negative I refer to as red. And whenever I run masterclasses or talks about it, I get people just to reflect on the green leaders they've come across in the past and the green traces that have been left upon them. But perhaps more importantly, the red traces, because we learn an awful lot more from the red because it creates a reaction in us. And we tend to remember them for longer. They anchor themselves differently in our cerebral cortex. And it's amazing, Michaela, how many times someone will bring up a red trace that is long history. You know, from a teacher at school, perhaps. Teacher said, you're never going to be successful in your chosen profession. Don't be ridiculous, Kinkaid. And you carry that with you. And there are people, I'm 50, there are people at my age now still trying to prove that teacher wrong or still carrying that red trace with them. And it can create a real emotional, visceral response when you ask, is there a red trace you'd be prepared to share? And some people go really deep on that, which is a real privilege for them to do that and share that. Of course it is. But the traces that come out are deep. And I refer to them sometimes as historic bruises that people are carrying as well. And then you get others who have got exactly the same trace, red historic trace, who use that as a motivating factor to go, I'm going to prove you wrong. They own it. They own that red trace truly in the sense of ownership. There's a guy called Jocko Willink out there wrote a book called Extreme Ownership. And they grab hold of that nasty red trace and use it and overturn it as a motivating factor to say, I'll prove you wrong, watch me. And they go on and do great things with that.
Yeah, this is definitely something that we have got in common, looking at what are the kind of deeply seated, I don't want to say motivators, but maybe patterns that are actually driving the leaders to behave certain way. And you know that this is my baby, again, like talking about subconscious patterns. And this is exactly what you're talking about. And this is where the work that you do is just so beautiful, because you allow your clients to get so vulnerable if they want to, if they choose to, so in touch with themselves. You create that safe space to really understand what is the place that I'm coming from, who am I being when I'm actually leading, and exploring whether who I'm being in this leadership role is actually serving me and is serving the others.
Exactly that. What I find almost everywhere is that leaders lead in their own default way in which they think they should lead. And to a certain extent, that's okay. That's authentic. And, you know, other words like that are probably overused slightly. But there's a danger that people role model what they think a leader should be. Not role play. There's good and bad from role playing leaders that we've had in the past. But if you role play what you think a leader should be, because we're taught, aren't we, all through life, leaders are strong, all-knowing, decision-making, not vulnerable. Do this, do that, order, give direction. And actually, my experience is quite the opposite, that when you're a little bit appropriately vulnerable as a leader, and by that I mean, if you don't know something, say, I don't know how to do this. Has anyone got any ideas? I'm slightly unsure. I'm slightly scared. That uncertainty. Mm-hmm. It's amazing, isn't it? When you're appropriately vulnerable, most human beings, unless they're an utter chump, will step closer and say things like, I had no idea you felt like that way. How can I help? I'm glad you said that. I feel the same. And that builds trust. Lencioni talks to us about the 5 dysfunctions, and the base function or behavior of high-performing teams is trust. And vulnerability is, in my experience, one of the quickest ways of building trust.
Mm-hmm. Oh, as you're talking, my body is just reacting to this whole conversation, because this is really, this is just really the topic that I could talk about forever. And exactly what you just said right now, just simply saying, I don't know something. And at the meeting that I don't know, this used to be my massive thing. So as my area of expertise and where I specialize in imposter syndrome, for me, saying I don't know was absolutely unacceptable for me personally, because that would prove that I am a failure. That would prove that I actually, how did I end up here? How did I end up being in this boardroom? So for me, actually saying I don't know, even if it was safe externally, internally, I had to do a lot of work over the last few years, when eventually I started being able to say, I don't know. And that internally didn't mean that I was a failure. Yeah. So what I'm really loving about this, because we have got synchronicities here going on, but also you are looking, from what I understand, you are working with your clients and their approach towards their teams, obviously understanding themselves, but also then how they pass it on to the teams, how they create safety, open up the spaces. My baby is really to working with that leader into great depth on the subconscious level very often, so that I create the psychological safety within the leader. And so there is a beautiful kind of symbiosis going on here. And I just love what you're saying.
Well, likewise, we're literally on the same song sheet here, but you tend to look at the individual, which is always the starting place. Because if the person doesn't believe it themselves, then it's going to come across as incongruent, and every human being will pick up on incongruence. And it'll just be this doesn't feel quite right. And therefore we need to 100%. Just get in and address it and be human. There's too many people who, because of our social conditioning around what a leader is, they try and be that leader, when actually there's no need to be that strong, all-knowing, warrior-esque type leader. We can be vulnerable. And the best leaders that I've worked for and have observed, and there's been thousands of leaders I've observed over the years that I've been doing this, the very best ones do say, I don't know, can you help? Anyone got any ideas? Granted, they then take it on as their own plan, and they remain responsible, accountable for the outcomes, as a good leader should. They maintain blame at their level and delegate credit and all those things that we expect. But it's a beautiful thing to witness when teams get that, understand it, and they start to care and start to step in closer. And the pace slows down, but they do more.
Oh gosh, you've just said so much in there that I would like to go into. Sure. But you mentioned the word care right now. And I understand that 3 guiding principles of forensic leadership, from the way how you look at it, is care, notice, and transparency.
Correct. Yeah.
Could we go a little bit more into each of those, from how you see it, how you coach it, how you train it when you work with the teams?
Some of them are difficult to train. You can only really talk about the benefits of these guiding principles and wait for people to click on to the fact that they work. Care being the key one. And my central philosophy around leadership is that great leadership comes from a position of care. If you genuinely care about those people around you, you can't help but leave green traces, because it's about the generosity and the care and the vulnerability and wanting to get the best out of them for them, and develop them to be the best they can be. So that's where the care comes from. And an element of that comes from my military past, where, you know, you're working in small groups of people or even large groups of people, but generally, you know, the people who are closest to you. And through shared adversity, through shared experience, there is a care, a genuine care that builds in those adverse conditions. And I would even go as far as to say it's love. Not from a sexual side, but, you know, a deep caring, which is, you know, you read lots of stories about people in combat who are fighting for the person next to them. They're not actually fighting for Queen and country or King and country or whatever the overarching governance is. They're fighting for the people next to them in order that they can all get onto the objective and win together. And it's that togetherness, not in battle, but in work. If we can have a unified approach that everyone understands where they're heading, then care is the way to guide people through that, I think. But
Can I ask, out of curiosity for me, because obviously your background is military, has been, you always wanted to be in British Army, you know, you said yourself that you were lucky to actually know from very early what you wanted to do. And yet we very often connect militarily with that kind of very dictatorial, right, very rigid way, at least for us outsiders, right, very rigid way of commanding. And yet your approach seems to be completely different, and right from the beginning. So there is actually a lot of I will use feminine energy in the context in here, but it doesn't mean, you know, feminine in a way of woman, but of that care, of that love that is all coming from the energy of the softness. So where does that come from in Paul?
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to have to bust the myth. It's very rare in the military that it exists in a command and control structure, because we know that doesn't work unless you're in extreme crisis. So the vast majority of the time, the military is an organization that does, on the whole, of course, you've got the odd microcosm who don't do it very well, but on the whole, deliver care, deliver leadership in a caring, collaborative way. It's not orders. It's sure, there's a rigid structure within which the army, or the military, I should say, operates, and they operate within tight boundaries because they have to, in order that when you deploy overseas and do the spiky stuff, that, you know, you understand where the guidelines and where the boundaries are, and you operate within those very taut restrictions. But you're not going to get the best of people if it's always do this, do that. And my experience of, I say only, because lots of people serve for longer than that. I served for only 20 years, but my experience is that the best leaders in the military and everywhere don't do that. And actually, you'd be surprised how rarely orders are given in the military. It's much more collaborative. You know, we need to do this. And then the various different levels of leadership step up based on a process called mission command, but translates into intent-based leadership. And that kind of moves on to the transparency, which I'll speak about later, if you like, or we can go there now. Which is the third guiding principle. Because it is just beautiful. And this is, you know, when we met a few weeks ago, that was really the first thing, that kind of your energy of just really caring. I think that's really, and just really making me feel, me personally as well, feeling really safe in our conversation. And then talking about leadership and how you operate. It is just a beautiful shift in a very often perceived masculine way of leading. Which I experienced a lot, you know, coming from a corporation. So I was in corporation for 25 years. So my reference of leader, of a male leader, most of the time is just being dictatorial. Really, that's you know, that's what we do. This is what I said, and this is how things go. So that's why for me to observe you in your energy is just a beautiful. It's like, thank you. I mean, you've got a background in hospitality, haven't you? And that can be very dictatorial, because again, it's all about the customer service, all about the customer's experience. And so often my experience in hospitality is that it's more command and control, more dictatorial than people expect the military to be, which is an odd, outcome there.
It is changing for sure, slowly but surely. But yeah, that is my experience. So coming from care, moving to the second principle of notice.
Yeah, we're too busy. We've got these things. We're constantly in this because of the immediacy of tech, and people expect an answer. I mean, how many times do you get an email and then you get a phone call saying, "Oh, Michaela, did you get that email I've just sent?" Well, it's an email, it'll wait. If it's urgent, pick up the phone, let's have a human interaction. But so we're nearly always head down. In the noticing element, I'm suggesting people get their head up and just pay more attention and notice what's going on. So there's this phrase that comes from actual jungle tracking, and it then brought itself into much more Iraq, Afghanistan, ground sign awareness, it's called, which is identify when things don't look and feel right. So that is, and the phrase is, the absence of the normal and the presence of the abnormal. So when you genuinely care about your team around you, you get to know them. So you get to know them as an individual. You get to know, that second level down. So the noticing element is, if someone comes in and they're not being themselves, I normally dress like this. I've got an open collar shirt on, chinos, genuinely. I've got chinos on today. I'm not sure.
Well done.
So if I normally turn in, never the same shirt, 2 days on the bounce. But if you turn up and I've got egg and bacon sandwich dripped down my front, or I haven't shaved particularly well, or I haven't ironed my shirt, for me, that is the absence of the normal and the presence of the abnormal. That is the time to demonstrate care and step in and say, Paul, I'm noticing a few things. Do you want to have a cup of tea, cup of coffee? So you can notice things that are going on with others, but also importantly, notice what's going on with yourself. And this is where, there's this synergy and this beautiful overlap in Venn diagrams of what you and I do, whereby just stop, slow down, and mindfulness is an overused word, but be genuinely mindful about what's going on with me right now. And in my language, if I'm tired because I've seen every hour of the clock last night, and we have those nights, don't we? Then I'm more likely to be clumsy in my leadership style. So I'm more likely to leave a red trace. So I can, again, own that. And from a position of care, explain to everyone that, look, I'm really sorry, I'm a bit tired today. I might leave a red trace, and put that out first. And that's a level of vulnerability, doing full circle again, whereby people can step in and say, no worries, Paul, I've got this today. And then they can just step in.
Yeah. And again, as we say, overlapped. And that's exactly the signs of being a conscious leader.
Yeah.
Knowing, consciously understanding, who am I on this kind of day, on that kind of day? Self-awareness, right? Maybe as well, overused phrase, but self-awareness is really just the key to everything.
For sure. I use a phrase, and it's in my book, that leaders need to be more conscious, deliberate, and intentional. And I know those words broadly mean the same thing, but we remember things in threes better. So conscious, deliberate, and intentional. And when we do that, we tend to slow down a little bit, which means we do things better. The military, particularly Royal Marines, have got a phrase that slow is smooth, smooth is fast. So, when you're learning to play golf, you don't whack the ball really quickly and really hard. You get the stroke and all the movement correctly first, and the power comes and the ball goes further eventually. And I think it's exactly the same in leadership. Slow down, get your approach and your processes right, understand you better, and you'll lead better as a result. So that conscious, deliberate, and intentional approach is fundamental for me.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I use the phrase slow down to speed up.
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah, same thing in there. Okay, let's move to, I want to come back to care because something just popped into my head that I would like to bring up, but I want to finish with the third principle, and that is the transparency.
Okay. Transparency, it comes from a number of things. So share who you are in the moment, as long as it's appropriate to do that. So that, I've seen every hour of the clock is a level of transparency. But more importantly, as a leader, your job is to lead and inspire others. And the best way, in my experience, of doing that is to communicate what you intend for the organization, your vision, if you want, your purpose, whatever you want to call it. I tend to call it intent. You communicate that in a really compelling narrative, not full of stats. They're not inspirational. I don't want to know that we need to increase our growth by 17.6%. That means nothing to me. But if you can talk to me about a story, a narrative, whereby it's aspirational, so it's a stretch target, because I appreciate, grow in a stretch zone, inspirational to get me out of bed, and transparent. And the transparency allows me to identify what part I play in the plan. So I know that I'm a valuable cog. And I can then take that a stage further. And if I can use a sort of theatrical analogy, if I know that my time to be in the spotlight is in Act 3, Scene 2, I'm going to work my hardest for everyone else in Act 1, because I know they're going to do the same for me when it's my time in the spotlight. So you find that when organizations are appropriately transparent, not radically transparent, that's something very different, and actually can be quite damaging. An appropriate level of transparency about what the future plans are, about the challenges that we face, allows people to step up and really step into that role, because decisions they then make, they know are getting the organization closer to that desired end state or the vision, which means they stop knocking on the leaders' doors, which means intent-based leadership is being used, and the organization starts to speed up, and the momentum and inertia builds, and we start achieving our goals and milestones ahead of time.
Yeah, beautiful. Again, just reflecting on something that you just said about pushing any of these principles to the extreme can actually have the opposite effect that we want. So, for example, being too transparent in an appropriate way can be damaging. And that leads me to what I was thinking about care. But as we were talking about care, quite often when I work with individuals, care is being mistaken for people pleasing. And this is such a thin line, and that's why knowing myself and knowing where am I, who am I when I'm caring for people? Where is that actually coming from? Is it because I want to be liked? And so that's why I will do whatever you want me to, or I will be nice to you. I will give you time off, whatever. But because really the end result that I'm after, and very often subconsciously, is me being accepted and acknowledged. That's a very different thing from caring. And so as we were talking about, pushing transparency into the extreme, all of these principles really have to come from knowing myself, so that I do not actually go from an unhealthy, wounded kind of place. And I'm doing a great stuff.
I spoke earlier about how the military operates within strict boundaries, but there's an element of freedom within those constraints, which is a slightly oxymoronic phrase. But it's exactly the same with these principles, exactly as you point out. So you can care too much. You can care in the wrong way. How many times do you and I approach organizations where they talk about their team as their family? That's a fundamental mistake to do that, because it invokes a different way of thinking about that team, which leads you away from appropriate discipline and boundaries to forgiving any behavior and over caring, because you can indeed over care, which stops you making those difficult decisions in the moment when a difficult decision is needed. And you might need to go into the command and control mode, because it's a very tightly constrained environment where a decision needs to be made in the moment.
And this is, we come back to what we were talking about, what we said at the beginning, that, being a leader, it really is a massive ask.
It is.
It's and, we are so quick to criticize, him and her and us, ourselves as well. But just giving ourselves and everybody else grace when gaining these skills, because it is an art. There's no other way around it.
It absolutely is. And this is why fundamentally promoting people as a result of technical competence alone, or longevity and loyalty, Paul, you're a great programmer, so we're going to make you the chief programmer. Or Paul, you've been with us since the start, so we're going to make you the chief operating officer. Fundamentally flawed, because people, for me, one of the key traits of a good leader is the will to lead. If you don't want to lead, you're not going to lead. You're going to abrogate responsibility. You're going to hide. You're not going to be congruent with yourself because you don't want to be in that position. So there's all sorts of challenges around how we promote the right people. It's not easy. We chat on events like this, and when we meet up in the pub, we chat about it, and we make it sound, oh yeah, just do this. But it's not. It's really challenging, and I accept that, and I work with organizations to help them overcome those challenges. For example, if someone's really very, very skilled in their job, technically incredibly competent, but they're not going to be a good leader, how do you remunerate that talent if you don't then give them leadership responsibilities? Because that's the way we do it, right? People go up the greasy pole, up the ladder, up the pyramid, whatever phrase you want to put into that. But how do we reward and remunerate that talent without giving them wider sort of HR responsibilities, let's call it that, leadership responsibilities? It's a challenge.
It is a huge challenge. And talking about imposter syndrome, actually promoting people from, let's say, being a fantastic manager to being a leader, where they all of a sudden need completely different identity skills, but also identity. They need to become somebody else. This is where very often imposter syndrome kicks in. Because all of a sudden you find yourself out of your depth and you start going, just like I did, all those years back, like, what am I actually doing here? How did I end up here? And then from these kind of promotions, micromanagers come, because if you are promoted and then now you all of a sudden you start fearing failing. And so you're going to start controlling everything. You're going to micromanage everything just to make sure that it seems like you are on top of things all the time. And there we go. It's a vicious cycle.
It is. And I think that if we start leadership development in teams and individuals much, much sooner in their career lifetime, what you end up creating, so you recruit someone into the organization, or you recruit a load of graduates, you give them leadership development training or how your organization leads, they naturally become better followers. And we've not got time to get into followership today, but it's a fundamental underpinning principle that all the skills, knowledge and experience and traits we want of a great leader, we also want in a great follower. And we are all followers of something or someone. We're not all leaders. So the best followers generally become the best leaders as well, because they understand what it is to follow.
100%. Well, we might do the second one and talk about the followers instead of leaders.
Let's do that.
You don't know what we're going to come up with. But tell us a little bit about your book that is just about to come out.
It is.
Leadership, Traces We Leave Behind. Talking about traces.
Well, the clue's in the title there, isn't it? It's my theory of forensic leadership. It talks about the traces we leave behind, some of the underpinning theories of that as well. When I talk about it briefly on episodes like this and podcasts like this and lives like this, that it can come across as slightly simplistic and slightly binary, red and green. But if you ever go into B&Q and try and buy, or a Home Depot and try and buy a red paint and ask for the red one, there's a whole load of reds. So, it's a sliding scale. The book comes out on the 29th of July, 29th of this month. 11 sleeps left until it comes out.
Not that you're counting.
Excited. Not that I'm counting. I am so counting.
So is it possible to pre-order now? Or
It's not because lots of people are setting up accounts for pre-order, and the book actually never comes out. So there's a risk involved in that. So pre-order is predominantly through publishing houses. I've chosen to self-publish, and you can't pre-order on a self-published book, but for good, social governance reasons. So it's out on the 29th, paperback and Kindle. Audiobook will follow. I'll be reading it, so people get to hear my voice, good or bad, no matter how that might be, once the audiobook is recorded. And it talks about all of the guiding principles in much more detail. It's got a great foreword by the incredible Marshall Goldsmith, the world-leading coach. And it finishes off with something called the Forensic Manifesto, which is 7 real good, hard-hitting, what would I say? Hard-hitting elements to help you lead better. You're probably leading, if you're listening to this, you're interested in leadership, you're already leading well, but good leaders know they can always do better. So the idea behind the book is to help people with those incremental steps of getting slightly better at what they do, and perhaps bring in the lexicon of red and green, because it's easier to talk about red and green and the traces than tell someone they're not a great leader.
Yeah. So from what I'm hearing, it's going to be quite practical as well, the book.
Pretty much. Yeah. Yeah. It's not a workbook, but people will get really good examples of how to do leadership from my perspective. Lots of ways of doing it. My way is called forensic leadership.
And how do you work with clients? Like, what would be why would who would contact you? So if somebody's listening to this and they're like, okay, this really resonates, either for myself or for the team, what is the way that you work?
I work with leaders who are leading well, but know they can do better. That's predominantly at the senior operational into strategic level of organizations, and help them accelerate operational performance exactly in the way we've already described. And I tend to do that in a number of ways, but predominantly it sits in one of three areas or more than one area, and it's on self, team and strategy. We develop those three as a triumvirate, slowly through masterclasses, through cascade events throughout the organization, one-to-one coaching, one-to-many coaching. And that's the way that I work with organizations and individuals. We've got some software that helps and underpins that as well. So it's a real ecosystem of delivery of processes, services and products.
And if people want to find you, where is the best way? What is the best way?
Currently, it's either through paulkinkaid.com, which is my speaking website, because Forensic Outcomes is still under development at the moment. The new website is under development, or directly through LinkedIn. Look me up, Paul Kinkaid, 2 Ks, and you'll find me. And just reach out. I'm super approachable. I'm pretty calm. Don't worry about.
I can confirm that.
And yeah, let's just have a chat. Zero commitment whatsoever. Let's just have a chat about what's resonated, what you think your future might look like. And if that involves me, great. And if it doesn't, then I can signpost onto someone who fits your future.
Beautiful. Well, Mr. Kinkaid, thank you so very much for your time. I really, really enjoyed it.
Me too.
Anything else that you would like to say before we close?
Be more green.
Yeah, be more green. Yeah, absolutely. Be more green from inside out, and then everything else around will start getting greener.
Michaela, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. Our chats, we could go on for hours. But yeah, I've really enjoyed it. There's loads more things we can explore that have come from this one. I'm looking forward to our next meeting.
Yeah.
And really, really enjoyed today. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you, and enjoy your holidays.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye now.